All righty. Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, depending on wherever or whenever you're listening. Welcome to the Perspectives on Leadership podcast, proudly brought to you by Fire Engineering. I'm your host, Steve Shaw, and I'm a proud Deputy Fire Chief for Jupiter Fire Rescue and a member of the Fire Engineering family. As always, my deepest gratitude goes out to you for choosing to invest your time in with us today. My consistent, intentional mission since day one of this podcast is the same as it is today, as it was in the beginning, to deliver real-world, applicable leadership insights that elevate our fire service. So as we continue through 2026, as I mentioned in a couple previous podcasts this year, my focus remains on elevating this show for you. I've spent a lot of time deconstructing and diving back into the episodes that brought the most value, that sparked the most actionable takeaways and the best dialogue. So I've refined the format, asked different questions, and I feel as if it's working for this year. So I'm happy to get into it. So let's just dive right in. Culture is one of those things that's on the hearts and minds of the firefighters everywhere today. And for me, I'm kind of a junkie on culture. I love to study it, talk about it, ask questions on the topic when it comes up. When I hear someone speak to the positive culture they have, or maybe the not so positive or a negative culture, that just kind of gives me a moment of pause. And I'd love to dive into whatever that looks like. I like to see what works and what doesn't work. And that could be from the macro level, like from the department or the municipality level, or even the micro level, like what's a truck company culture or an aggressive firefighting culture or a search culture? What does that look like, right? So as many of the listeners know, for me, I'm working at the Town of Jupiter Fire Rescue Department right now. We're building a fire rescue department from the ground up. That not only includes the infrastructure, the trucks, the stations, the people, but also the culture, intentionally and deliberately building the culture. For me, I completed my EFO research recently on the topic of culture. And ironically, my counterpart at work, Mike DiStefano, the other deputy chief, he completed his doctorate in strategic leadership, also focusing on fire service culture. So he and I, as we're going to work, we talk culture every morning, we talk culture during the day, and then we talk culture on the way home. It's a phenomenal soup to be in right now. I'm blessed to be able to talk about that every day. For us, we're establishing this citizen-based culture where our goal is to be loved by the residents as well as by those that get to work here. So all that being said, I followed Chief Scott Thompson for some time now. I've read his book, The Functional Fire Company. I'm currently rereading his formal mentoring in the fire service document that he's graciously given to the whole fire service. And additionally, I'm excited that we're bringing Chief Thompson down to Jupiter in June as part of our inaugural training program for our new fire department. So putting this all together, I thought this would be the perfect time to talk culture and, more importantly, how to be intentional on the ways we can deploy and execute ways to instill positive fire service culture, whether you're starting something like I am or we are now, or you're trying to creating momentum to improve the existing culture in your organization. So joining me today is Chief Scott Thompson, a 45-year veteran in the fire service, fire chief for the Colony Fire Department in Texas. His career spans from the volunteer ranks all the way to command positions in major suburban fire departments like Plano and Arlington. But he's perhaps most widely recognized as the author of the seminal book, The Functional Fire Company, Positioning Small Groups for Success and Survival. So longtime instructor at FDIC, Texas A&M. He's a leading voice in fire service culture, emphasizing the health of the organization begins with the proficiency and leadership of the individual company. So, Chief, I thank you for being on today. I am really looking forward to diving into this topic with you today.
Thanks for having me on, Chief. I'm looking forward to it. And you guys are doing some really cool stuff, and I'm paying close attention because you don't see that often an organization start from scratch. And it's going to be interesting to see not only how you get up and running, but how you mature over the years. And, you're going to have a great experience when you get to that point to look back and say, what worked, what didn't work, what would I do differently? I think one of my greatest advantages that I have is that I've got to work for a lot of organizations and some iconic fire service leaders. So I've worked in what I would consider a healthy or a desirable culture, and I've worked in some not so desirable. And like yourself, I've been a student of it and really tried to track what were those defining moments in those organizations that cause the culture, the things we value, to move the needle, to either fortify a culture that we wanted, or kind of step away from one that maybe we wanted to change.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and that's why I'm so excited to talk to you about this. I think that there's a lot of similarities from what you've been through, and or maybe are even going through now, to where we are today as we're building this culture. And you know, it's one thing that we want to make. We know that we have to be intentional about. We can't just let it happen. It's not going to work. So we're very intentional about focusing on it on a day-to-day basis. But let me ask you this: as we start this conversation, one of the questions that I've asked previous episodes, some of the guys that are on shift, is, what does your day look like when you're going to shift? Like on your way to shift, what are you thinking about? What makes you happy? So for you, we're kind of talking about this right before we started, but as you're going to work, as you're reporting to duty, what excites you as you're making that drive into work? What does that look like?
Wow, that's a great question. Finding the best way is always, I don't do good in stagnant organizations. So we talk in our organization at the micro level all the time. We have a very good leadership team, and our true motivation is to do what's absolutely best for the men and women of the organization, and then to provide a quality service when we go out on the street. So, I've been with the organization 17 years. So I'm going to answer your question kind of in two parts. Up until probably a year or two ago, it was that drive to find what's best for the Colony, Texas. There's a lot of good things going on in the fire service around the country, but what is best for the Colony, Texas? And, how do we maximize the capabilities that have been provided to us by the community? How do we create greater value in the community? And so that's part of it now, because we have so many awesome people in the organization. What excites me now is watching them take the vision and run with it. And I mean, because we've been doing this so long, we currently have officers that when they were firefighters, we were introducing this. So they've come up through the organization under this thing we've been pursuing, which we call a chosen learning culture. And what really excites me now, I mean, I'll get a text message, I'll see something on social media, and I'm just going, man, the guys get it. And so now it's kind of like, being a dad and you're, you figure out your kids have figured it out and they're on their own. So I love that now, and seeing we're at the point now where a lot of our problems, and they're not significant, are handled at the firehouse level, because the men and women of the organization want to protect the culture that we have. I'm getting ready to retire. And so the big conversation now is, how do they protect this, which they've worked so hard to achieve? Getting there is one thing. Sustaining it is a whole nother challenge. And so that's what really kind of excites me now. I'm fortunate now, and my boss doesn't care about our ISO rating. We're not pursuing accreditations. Those aren't important to him. He wants us to deliver a high quality service to the community. So we're at a point now where I'm able to do a lot of reading and research and kind of fine tuning some of the things that we've had going on. And I really enjoy that.
So I think that starts off beautifully, this conversation. First of all, some of the things you said, I often find myself saying this comment a lot these days. Don't look at it as redundant, look at it as reinforcing, especially like if I'm bringing in, let's say, multiple speakers to a leadership class. Let's say they may hear the same thing said over the course of time. Or if you go to a conference, you may hear different leadership presentations, and somebody will say something again, and you may think, oh, I've heard that. I ask people not to look at it as redundant, but look at it as reinforcing. If you're hearing it multiple times, maybe you should be paying attention. So it's funny, a couple of things you just said about running with the vision, watching your people work, and handle at the firehouse level. It's great. I'm having these conversations right now with my fire chief on a day-to-day basis, and he's reinforcing these things that through a course of a career we strive to obtain, right? And one of those things you just mentioned was that, like, you want things to be handled at the firehouse level, like whether that's through empowerment or decentralized leadership or whatever. And we're building that to empower those people to do that. In other words, You guys got this. You can handle it. We're training you and preparing you to handle those, not just simply just pass something us to up because you can't. No, we want to empower you to do that. So it's nice to hear that, because some of the things you already just mentioned are things we're striving to start from day one, right? And I've actually had a chance to talk to some of your crew in various areas. Like, for example, one of the people I talked to, quite frankly, is Steve Wilcox.
Okay.
I
Yeah.
really like that guy. And whether it's because he's an EMS guy like me, I don't know. There's a part of me that's EMS, and he's all ate up with it. So we talk cyano kits and structure fires and the mix between. He's cool, man. But I called him one day because what I've been doing is, as I have these conversations, I always call members of the crew or the team of which the person works with. And I was talking to him one day just recently, like, hey, man, what's it like to work with that guy? What's it like to work with Chief Thompson, man? And it was great because he's like, Steve, and this is his quotes, right? He goes, he likes to maybe come up with the ideas, but the crews do the work, right? He loves letting firemen be firemen. He's humble. In other words, for example, we kind of joked about it. He's like, listen, he's the first person to tell you that he may not be the subject matter expert on medical, but he empowers those people, whether the single role medics or the people in the EMS bureau, to take the leadership role on that. And I think one of the most important things he said is, even if there's things that you don't agree with your crews on, he says he's willing to listen. And a lot of times people just need that someone just to listen to them, make sure they get what they need out. And wherever it goes, but that first step is willing to listen. So it was nice talking to him to kind of hear his reflections on you.
Thank you for sharing that. Thank you, Lieutenant Wilcox.
Much, I'm not trying to. I don't know if he's preparing for a promotion or I have no idea. But
he's doing great things. That was truly a vision, and nobody around us is doing that. And when we started it, everybody thought we were crazy. Again, I was never a paramedic, so I was not able to contribute at a really high level. And that group has taken it. We've always said that we have a fire first preparedness culture, and there's reasons why we do that, which we can get into later if you want. But I tell you, we have 18 single-role paramedics that are just through their contributions are changing the culture of the organization, and we're getting a lot of EMS injected in it, which is not a bad thing. But it's kind of like the two dominant philosophies now are really competing because they've done such a great job with that single role that it's really been an interesting thing to watch organizationally.
So, we mentioned before that the functional fire company. I was reading that kind of prepping for this, and in the book, you talk about that fire company being the most important unit in the fire service, right? So, based on that, for let's use me for example, for a newly formed or newly forming fire department like mine, what would you say is one of maybe the single most habits a captain or officer can instill on day one or consistently to ensure their company is functional rather than operational? What does that look like?
Well, and we talked a little bit about that. And so there's kind of a generic answer, but it's really, you define it organization to organization. What functional looks like in your organization may be a little different than what it looks like in my organization. So, some of the things that we're going to talk about, the big thing that I always challenge fire service leaders with is, how do you define success? What are you pursuing every day? And it's got to start there. I mean, we have our purpose statement. Our purpose is why we exist. Our mission is the most important thing we do. Then we have our core values, right? Well, our culture is what the organization values, our artifacts, our assumptions, our shared assumptions, all these other things. So every organization is going to have a culture. If a group comes together and stays together, a culture is going to form. So what we're talking about is pursuing a chosen culture. Well, the leadership team has to kind of define what functional looks like. So in my organization, we define functional as it operates the way that it's supposed to. So we've got to define how an engine company should operate, how a truck company, how a squad. And if you know about the colony, we're very much into this engine and truck deployment model with pre-arrival assignments and riding assignments. So we have a very scripted response. Now, that's not for everybody, and people will disagree with it. So we can actually look and see what functional looks like. We've taken it out of our heads and put it into practice. And, I use a lot of sports analogies. In a football game, whatever level you're talking about, the coach calls in a play. And as soon as he calls that play, he expects something to happen. And if it looks like what it looked like in the playbook, right, then that's functional. It worked. But if we don't take the time to define those things ahead of time, then we have a hard time. You can ask a guy that's ridden an engine company for 20 years, what's a functional engine company? And he's going to kind of scratch his head. How do you define engine company success? So we talk about, what does it have knowledge of? What does it have to be capable of? What does it have to have the ability to do? And those things start to define it. So, organizational culture, that's what makes your culture look a little different, your organization look a little different from mine. So in ours, training is number one. We're a high performance learning culture. So it's got to be a company that trains, but not trains just to train. It's deliberate and produces results. We do what we call company preparedness drills twice a year. And we either run a stopwatch and it's done with urgency, or we look at it accurately. Did they do it the way it's supposed to look? And so at least twice a year, we're measuring that. And then we look on the fire grounds. We have what we call objective-based fire operating guidelines. So we have objectives. So if the objective is met, that's great. That was intentional. That was part of the plan. If we don't meet the objective, then we go back and we look at it. We do an after-action review. And then we say, okay, do we need to modify the objective or do we need to train differently? So it's kind of a long answer to what appeared to be a simple question, but I define what functional looks like in the Colony, Texas Fire Department. Now, firefighting is situational first, local second, then regional, then occupational. So as the American Fire Service, we could sit here and come up with the things that we think that every fire company should do. Functional as it operates, it's the way it's supposed to. And we could come up with a pretty good list, and I think most people would agree with us, and we could define that. But, I want my members to be prepared mentally, physically, mechanically, and procedurally. And I want the organization every day to do 6 things. The number one thing is maintain a mission mindset. That's really important. The mission has to be the most important thing. If not, what is? Something is. And the mission is the one thing that brings us together with 1,000 things pulling us apart. The mission's one thing that unites us. Take care of people, them and us. Use all available resources to solve the problem. Manage risk inside and outside the firehouse. Maximize our operational capability. Let's learn how to do the most with what we have. And then the last one is minimize the zero impact period. And I say that to really focus on the last one. So ours, we're going to prepare mentally, physically, mechanical, procedurally. And then what I look for is constantly improving that zero impact period, the time from when we show up on scene, set the parking brake, and start going to work. And we're always trying to shave seconds off of that. It's like a golf score. You want a lower number. So that's how we define functional in our organization. There's probably bits and pieces that transfer to your organization, but each organization really defines what functional is. And it's got to start with defining success and then packaging that so you can sell a vision of success so that the organization can buy into it. And that's really what's critical. We started off as kind of a philosophy-driven organization, and I wish we could have remained that. When we were small, we had 30 members. We had very few policies. And so we wanted a common philosophy. But now that we're 100 members, we're having to get more policy and get a little bit more formal. And it was really sad to kind of leave that philosophical, operational philosophy, leadership philosophy, mindset and going more to some more structured guidelines. But, I can tell you what I think functional looks like, but you guys are defining that right now in Jupiter Fire. The thing is, you got to get it down to where everybody can kind of start to recognize what it looks like, so that you got to have consistency. You got to have some predictability. And I think that's where a lot of organizations struggle, because they don't have that consistency. They have expectations, but no standards. And so, if you've heard the expression, we have 3 shifts and 4 firehouses and 12 different ways of doing things.
Mm-hmm.
Well, that tells me a lot of things. They're not pursuing a chosen culture. They don't have standards. They probably have some expectations, but they're not really strong. And so all that kind of plays into it.
So I mentioned earlier before we started this that I'm hoping this stays to about an hour. There's so much here right now that probably could take the rest of the day to dive into. I would be very focused on trying to just stay on the course and try to get done in a decent time frame. But there's so much I want to just go off on tangents with right now. But let me start with this. And I love that you're talking about mission and going into the core values. Even right now, as we're building this fire department, and we've come from different agencies, right? And I think that you and I to a certain extent, I know that you teaching and presenting, you travel and you get to see a lot of different fire rescue departments, and they're all different, right? Everybody's got some differences, some similarities, but when it comes down to the mission and those kind of things, it's interesting. When we were starting to develop this. My boss, over and over again, he will say this over and over again. He'll say, Steve, we're building a fire department that the community is going to love, and that the people that get to work here love coming to work. And we say it so much that it just rolls off the tongue. It's the standard now. It's a constant thing. It's the top. It's the vision he's casted. The other thing is, in terms of a mission, I love this. One day we were talking about this years ago, and he sent me something and it kind of stuck. And he's like, your life, our mission. Your life, our mission. And I paused there for a moment. I'm like, man, I love that. I love that statement. I love it for so many reasons. One, because it's easy to remember. It's not like, and listen, I've been with departments that their mission statement's about yay long. It's a paragraph, and that's listen, to each their own, right? But this one spoke to me, because whether it's me pumping on your chest to get your life back, or I don't know, going into a hoarder house and saying, man, how can I help your life get better? What do I need to do? Now, I'm not going to walk away from this. What is my role in helping your life improve? What can I do? I can describe that. I can visualize that. I can now translate that. And as we're building this, we have these conversations all the time. So as we're building the infrastructure, as we're building the training, as we're building the inaugural training, everything is baked into those concepts, and everything translates and goes back to those essential concepts. So it's constantly, consistently reinforced. Even the
and what you're doing, you're wanting to institutionalize that. You want that to become the fiber of the organization, and it's deliberate. And I think that's where a lot of organizations struggle. They first of all, they don't package it so you can remember it and be consistent with it, and then they don't repeatedly inject it into classes or meetings or whatever, so that it just becomes part of your language. It becomes part of who you are. And that's where a lot of they pursue what I call canned or outside standards. They didn't create them inside, so they don't really understand them. They're checking the boxes or filling out the forms. They're getting a sticker on the side of the rig. Nothing wrong with that. But I think what you're doing and what we did is we're saying, let's start with our organization internally, bring that stuff outside. So we already have a platform established, and we're not letting all these influences drag us this way and that way. And now we're becoming this, and that's kind of like the program or project of the week. And so that is the key point, is there has to be at the micro level, this core belief and this core journey, if you will, that we're all going to take together to achieve this bigger vision of success that we want to. And we're never fully going to get there. I mean, it's a journey. It's not a destination, right? You're never going to say, okay, we're there. Yeah. We're going to say, okay, we got here. Now what does the next phase look like? And so you're always in that growth mode.
So, and it's also interesting in Florida specifically, and I know this is maybe depending on where you are in the country, maybe similar. Right now in Florida, specifically even South Florida, Like every department in the state's hiring. There are just more seats open than there are people to fill the spots.
Same way in
And it's
Texas.
never been like that, right? It's never been like that. And I keep telling people that over and over again when I talk to them, I'm like, listen, this is the perfect time to get into the fire service. Not only because of the jobs that are available, but because if you truly can align your philosophies, your mission, the way you are with the organization that best suits you, that's a marriage made in heaven. And I tell these folks that I'm talking to at the fire academies or coming in looking at the fire service, I'm like, listen, take the time to do your research and figure out where you want to be best fit. So, some people want to work for a single station fire department in a very tight knit group. That's wonderful. Some people want to work for a monstrosity, like my brother does in Miami-Dade Fire Rescue or Palm Beach County or Jacksonville or one of these big organizations. And that's great too. Wherever you want to go, you can go. But I keep telling people, do the work to figure out where you want to align. Where does that alignment fit? And for us, and I keep telling people like right now we're interviewing a lot of people, and you could tell the ones that are, let's say, been coached for interviews, and that's fine. I have no problem with that. In fact, it helps. I would say it helps. But I can't. I tell these people over and over again. I'm like, guy, you got to just be authentic. I just need to know who you are. I need to figure out if this is going to work. I need to figure out if this date's going to turn into marriage for 20 years. I need to figure out if you're the right cultural fit. So I'm going off on a tangent here, but I guess my whole point is being able to define the culture of your organization so much so that people can see it and go, oh, okay, I get it. And whether they want to come there or not, now they have that informed decision, right? So that weighs in me a lot,
No,
So, for the colony, you guys have this incredible track record of retention, right? And in an era where a lot of departments are struggling with both the recruitment and the retention aspect of things and maybe some job hopping, for you, what does that look like? Like, what do you attribute that to? Like, break that down for me.
well, and we're starting to. It's not as good as it was. We had a great run for about 12 or 13 years where we had very, very, very little turnover. And we have problems like everybody else. We had COVID, and then we had an issue after that. And we're right next door to Plano, Texas. And if you know anything about Plano, they're one of the highest paid departments in the state. They have 4-person staffing on everything, and they just announced they're going to a 24/72 schedule. So that's what we have to compete with. Well, we just lost 3 people to Plano. I know for a fact 2 of them went for the money. And then one of them was a single role paramedic that went through fire school. He wanted to be a firefighter. We didn't have a slot, so he went there. So it's not as good as it was. It's still very good. But to answer your question, so I'm going to go back to kind of what you said. We did something called the Colony Project, and we really took the time to figure out what the best fit was for our organization. And we kind of have an expression. We say they are kind of weird, that they're buying into the stuff that we're kind of selling. And I think that's another area where the fire service kind of swings and misses. Every organization has something to offer. But what are you putting out on social media? What are you putting out on your job announcements? Are you selling something that's going to attract people? Or are you just selling a job? Now, some people will, they're going to go to work for the first person that hires them. They want something close to home. Maybe they want to be on the water or whatever. Those things are givens. But if you understand your organization, like we bring in people who don't mind training, because training is such a huge part of what we do that we start that on day one. And so we attract the people that want to train. We're finding out in interviews that people like our engine and truck deployment model. The generation coming in the fire service wants to know if they're going to be riding an engine so that they can get really good at that. And then they'll move to other things. Our mentoring program, that we respect the good traditions of the fire service. So what we've really done is we've tried to create this environment that allows firefighters to be firefighters. Now, again, that's a bumper sticker. We got to talk about what that looks like. But, something that was always strange to me, we always say that, EMS is what we do the most of, right? It's our backbone, it's our bread and butter. Yet there are fire departments around the country. Every day they put people on the ambulance and go kicking and screaming. The last thing they want to do is ride those ambulances, right? So in my mind, we had that discussion. That's kind of why we talked about this single role paramedic program. Hey, why don't we put people on the ambulance that love riding the ambulance, that take it to the next level? So if we're going to say we want to be an organization that's high performing and that we're doing all these cool things, then we've got to put people in those positions that want to thrive in those areas. And that gets out. So, culture, the first sign of what culture is how you talk about yourself internally and how people talk about you externally. So you want those two conversations, if you will, to align. We don't want to sell them a bill of goods. We don't want to promise something we can't deliver. But you mentioned Lieutenant Wilcox. I mean, we got Fraze, we got Sandy, we got Harden. We got these guys that go around the country and they talk about Garrett Rice. They talk about the Colony Way. Now, we're not perfect. We got problems, but that attracts a certain type of person. And that's what we want to do. So when we have a hiring process, we don't bring in huge numbers, but we're more about the quality than the quantity. If I can get 5 or 6 really good fits for my organization, I don't care if I have 20 show up or 20,000 show up. I just want to get those 4 or 5 or 6 really good fits. So it's a mindset. It's a pursuit of a chosen culture. It's an advertisement of what you're putting out there. And then it's having some kind of standard, if you will, or some kind of benchmark to measure, if you will, the people that you're bringing in. Now, we don't get it right every time. And, that's one of the things that kind of breaks my heart a little bit is I'll interview these guys and I'll think, man, these guys are going to be rock stars. And then we get them on board and they're not bad people. They're just not, they're not what we thought. So all that, but if you know the kind of person that's going to fit best in your organization, you can bait the hook, if you will, to try to attract that type of person. Mm-hmm. And when you get like-minded people in an organization, in a firehouse, in a battalion, on a shift, then the work kind of starts at that level. Those guys are out talking at fools meetings or other stuff, and they're selling what they're doing. And guys say, hey, I want to be a part of that. Mm-hmm. And so then they come over and then they fit in. And we start doing this thing and they get comfortable doing it. And then if they want to leave, they look outside and they go, well, there's nothing really else that matches this. Yeah, I make a little bit more money over here, but I'm going to give up something. I'm going to ride the ambulance a whole lot more. One day I'm going to be riding the engine. The next day I'm going to be riding a truck. And for some people, that's okay. But for a lot of people, it's not. So I guess all those things, there's not an easy answer. All those things kind of play into it.
So it's interesting. I've, for the last year and a half now, I've been having these conversations with people about, just what we're building here, what that's going to look like. Because I want them to have a clear, at least our vision and what a clear expectation is what we're trying to build. And it's funny because I had a buddy of mine named Keith, and he calls me one day. He goes, you know what? I think I know what it's going to look like. I'm like, oh, you do? What's it going to look like, Keith? And he goes, well, I know the demographics. I know the situation. I know that between 9 and 9,500 calls per year. So I know we're gonna not a crazy amount of calls, but not slow. It's gonna be busy. We're gonna run our calls. I'm like, yep. And he knows the area, so he knows about car accidents and the water and the marine area and all that kind of stuff. I'm like, okay. He goes, then I know you, and you're a trainer, and I know you're gonna have us training every day. I'm like, you're damn right. Every single day is a training day. Absolutely. End of the story. That is the expectation. That is a standard. Now, whether that's 5 minutes on a tool or 8 hours in gear at an acquired structure, every day is a training day. End of story. I won't have it otherwise, period. He goes, no. Okay, I want that too. I got it. He goes, then you're going to have us involved in the community like we've never been before. I'm like, yes, you're right. And that's not only just going to HOA meetings or, those kind of things. I'm talking about deep culture immersion. I want every moment to be a wow moment. Like, what does that look like? And we start going off on this tangent about, how we want you to be part of this community so that they do realize, wow, holy cow, this is amazing. It's not just fire and EMS, which is our primary goal, emergency response, but it's so much more. And then he goes, no, I want to do that too. I want to be so involved. And he goes, then at night, you may leave me alone. I'm like, yes, at night, I'll leave you alone. I'm not going to bother you in the middle of the night. Okay. But these conversations are great because I try to make sure I'm very deliberate in explaining the expectation that we are going to train. We're going to be busy, but you're going to love the work. With the work, and it's just like Aaron Field says, work fixes everything.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm not afraid to give the work. I'm not afraid to delegate. I'm not afraid to challenge you and push you. I don't mind pushing a little bit because you're going to benefit. You're going to grow, and it's going to be a beautiful thing. But yeah, I like. It goes back to the expectations, like you're saying, making sure they understand, not selling a false bill of goods. You don't want that either. You don't want to get on the job and go, well, this isn't what I was promised. This isn't what you guys said. So
Mm-hmm.
yeah, I get that. And you mentioned a couple other things, and I love that you said let a firefighter be a firefighter, but that's just a bumper sticker and let you define it.
Right.
I
What does that
love
look
that. As we talk about this and talk about culture, one of the things that you mentioned in your book that I actually have written on my board is that's managing culture daily, right? And when I was doing my research for my EFO, that was said a different way. It's said in multiple different ways. I've actually pulled up my thing on another screen right here, and I'm looking at how that was said, but that same statement was said different ways. But what does that look like? In other words, if we were to deploy that or we were actionalize that, what does that mean? What does that look like?
So for those listening, I'm going to kind of go against the thousands and thousands and thousands of leadership books that are out there. Our people are our most important asset. We'll agree with that, right? But the culture is the most important thing. And this is why I say that. And maybe we can discover something here. But name one thing that the culture doesn't influence. Culture influences everything. Our mindset on safety, how we train, quality versus quantity, how we approach problem solving. The culture, I always say culture is to an organization as character is to an individual. Individual values, organization values. So the culture impacts everything that we do. It is the most important thing. Our people are our greatest asset. But if we go out and try to hire really good people and then we bring them into a toxic culture, we're going to have problems. That's why I say culture's up here, our people are right here. So it's that important. So if it is, then we got to pay attention to it daily. The first problems show themselves as morale problems. We've all been in the firehouse. Morale's the lowest it's been. Morale sucks. And a lot of chiefs will just blow that off. They'll either say, morale's not my problem. It'll fix yourself. Well, we pay attention to those things. And, I can be around a group of our people and get a sense for how things are going. And we talk about it every day, just as you do. And so when we're talking about managing the culture daily, it's really just being deliberate every day to pursue a direction. Leadership is movement. We're moving the organization. So it's being deliberate in movement. We're pursuing something. And then we're paying attention to what we call the ripple effect. Every decision that you make, I don't care how big, how small, there's always a ripple effect. And a lot of fire department organizations, a lot of fire service leaders fail to think about what that ripple effect is. And so I think success just on the fire ground, the same thing in leadership, is really going to be dependent on your grasp of the basics. We got to get those basic things built into part of our daily routines. Lasky likes to say it, sweat the small stuff, because that's where these problems start. And so when I say manage the culture daily, it's like I got a radar on every day. When I send out an email, I think, okay, what's the ripple effect? When we make a decision, what's the ripple effect? How is this going to impact the culture? Is it going to make us look different? Is it going to make us behave differently? Now, we make decisions all the time. It's not pleasing people. It's in pursuit of this thing that we are chasing. And if we're making the decisions that's best for the majority of the organization, sometimes that's got to be good enough. And so it's just this awareness. It's situational awareness, basically, of this thing that governs everything in our organization. I mean, seriously, Chief, can you think of one thing in your organization right now that's not influenced by culture?
I'm struggling to find it. I'm struggling.
Haven't had a good answer yet. And so, I mean, even what our people do on their days off is influenced by our organizational culture.
Okay.
And so it's hugely important. But, these chiefs get off pursuing all these, all these other things, these canned deals. We're all in on ISO. ISO 1 isn't great. We're an ISO 2. We're not a 1, but that's great, or accreditation, or all these other stuff. And they don't understand their organization, that there's no organic content in there. There's no defining us. We're pursuing all these outside things. And it's kind of like we create a I don't know, what do you call those stores, like Salvation Army, where everybody brings their clothes and then people go in there and kind of pick out what they want to. It's like we just got all this stuff in here and we really haven't defined us, or what we really believe in and what our culture values. And I think that's why a lot of organizations really struggle when they talk about culture. They haven't taken the time to really define what it is. We did a document way back when I first started. And the first generation calls it Excellent Vision and Professional Standards. And what it was a shortcut. I'd been with a lot of organizations. And so I came into the colony and I would spend, the first few months going to the firehouses and listening to what the men and women, what did we need to start doing? What do we need to stop doing? What do we want more of? What do we want less of? Doing that kind of stuff. And then on the weekends, I would just kind of purge my brain. I would try to put in paper what I thought this thing should look like. And they were mostly bullet points, but there were benchmarks and there was some motivational stuff. And I took it to each of the shift commanders at the time and I said, here, if you want to see what the efforts that I'm asking you to put forward could produce, this is it. And I always tell this story in my class. Now, it wasn't as much about the content of that document as it was that for the first time in the history of these members that were 30 plus years, the first time they had something that explained the long game, where they could get the culture, or this chosen culture, or this vision of success from the mind onto paper, where other people, and then, you mark on it, you improve it, you change it, but you got to have those anchors. You got to have those core things in place that you build on. And if you miss that, then you're going to struggle. But you got to get, your purpose statement, your mission, and your core values. Those, every organization has them, but what do they really mean? And are we going to have action steps for those? And are they going to hold us accountable? And are they going to be part of our decision-making process? All those things are essential to this pursuit of managing the culture daily. I mean, our core values are duty, respect, and integrity. So we define those, and then the decisions that we make, we look at how is that going to impact that? How is it going to impact the mission? What is that ripple effect? And I think that's probably the biggest component of managing the culture daily. Morale problems are easy to fix. Culture problems are very difficult to fix. So you want to fix those problems the first presentation, if you will. Jump on them quickly and try to solve them before they become institutionalized and become cultural problems.
It's funny. I don't know if this is the most correct analogy, but I'm glad that I read that in your book, and I'm glad we talk about it a lot. In other words, the idea of managing culture daily. In other words, it's not a once and done. It's a continuation. It's a continual thing. Like it's
every day
work. And it's interesting. I wish there were things that were said to me years ago. Like, for example, when I was a driver years ago. Right. But like years ago, when I was a driver, I was a crappy driver. It's the best job in the world. I was a crappy driver. I did not do well. I didn't appreciate it. And then years later, I was talking to a bunch of guys I was teaching with up north, and that concept of position, don't park, right? If somebody would have just told me that like 20 years ago as a driver, like, Steve, you don't park the truck, you position it for response. Just big items like that, big, like, mind-blowing statements where if I would have heard that 20 years ago, I would have been like, oh, it would have just changed my mindset. So with this, I love reading the idea of that managing culture daily, because it's a sobering reminder that every day you got to pay attention. You got to water your plants. You got to put the work in. It's not going to do it itself. You have to work on it. But again, going back to the work fixes everything. It's okay. Like, I don't mind tending to the culture. And I think that the key word there was being deliberate. I think that, and maybe correct me if I'm wrong, but if we're not deliberate, like I make this analogy a lot, that life, nature abhors a vacuum, right? Nature abhors a vacuum. If there's a vacuum, something rushes in to fill it. So if we're not deliberate with focusing on the culture, something's going to fill that void, and we may not like what that something is.
Absolutely. There's always going to be something to fill a void or fill a need. And firemen are great at that. And so, the best you can hope for, and we talked about the layers of culture. You got the macro culture, the American Fire Service. You got the organizational culture, our organization. You got the subculture, which are shifts, battalions, and supervisors. And then you have the micro cultures, right? You really hit pay dirt when all those align. When the microculture complements the organizational culture and vice versa. You can get to that point, man, you can give a master's class on culture if you can get to that. Culture is a lot like leadership. There's a lot of gray area because most of probably what you read when you did your EFO I've read a lot of Edgar Schein. I think his thoughts on organizational culture best fit the fire service. There's a ton of them out there. And so there's some interpretation in there, and that's why you got to go back to those core things, the core values and the mission and those, and make sure that those are a part of it. But there's a lot of interpretation, and there's nothing wrong with that. But you got to put in the work. Again, here we go using that work to decide what is best going to produce that which you are pursuing, that vision of success. Now, a lot of organizations, they haven't even done that. They can't tell you what success looks like, so they can't pursue it. And we have kind of, we talk about how do you keep score in the fire service. We don't have a standardization for that. And in our organization is if we can go out and solve the problem, that's a win. People call us when they have a problem, whatever that is. If it's an emergency problem, if it's a humanity problem, it's a whatever it is. If we can solve the problem, that's a win. If we neglect, overlook, or pass off the problem, that's a loss. It's very difficult to go undefeated in this line of work. So that's our every day. That's a huge part. If we go out the door and solve the problem, boom, we did our job. Now, if we're compassionate while we're doing that, if we're thorough while we're doing it, if we go the extra step, we notice another problem while we're there and we address that problem, that's all going above and beyond. That's the icing on the cake. So it takes on a life of its own, if you will, that, we're buying these things, we're investing through training and technology and all this cool stuff with the sole purpose of solving the problem.
No, I love that you said when the microculture and the macroculture is aligned. That's powerful, and that's a constant reminder. It goes back to what you're saying about before about the three different stations, three different shifts, 4 different stations, 12 different cultures, right? Trying to get those aligned. That's when you have.
And that's a non-negotiable in our organization. When I created the battalion chief's position, I said we're going to be more alike than we are different. And I expect those battalion chiefs to talk to one another. And if there's an operational change, it's going to be organizational. It's not going to be on a shift. We're not going to have this B shift comes in the morning and changes the nozzle and changes the hose and changes, all the other stuff. Because we want to deliver a consistent service. It kind of goes back to, you said you want to be the organization that you want people to have fun and work for and the one that the community loves. I say personally, I want to build an organization that I want my sons working for. I got 2 sons in the fire service, and that I would want responding to my 5 grandbabies in the event that they have a fire. That's kind of when I make a decision. But sometimes those compete with one another. And so you've got to have a way of working through this. Unfortunately, a large majority of the fire service is internalizing. All they're doing is what's best for us. What they're doing outside the firehouse has become second. And, I think we've kind of, if I can say the word, bastardized the term servant leadership. Servant leadership is not about making everybody happy. That's a quick pursuit to failure. To me, servant leadership is giving me what I need to thrive. And sometimes that's maybe telling me things that may be a little bit uncomfortable. That practicing courageous leadership. It's not allowing me to drift towards failure. It's not creating an environment where I get everything I want when I want it. That's going to cause you a lot more problems. Aaron Fields says it the best. Words have meaning. Do we take the time to really define? So in our organization, our core values are duty, respect, integrity. We define integrity as dependable in any role or any position. And when you have a very choreographed fireground like we have, if one person doesn't do their job, a whole other bunch of people are going to pay the price. So you've got to take ownership of your position in the morning, and you got to be on your game, because if you're not, everybody's going to notice it. You're not going to be able to hide it, and other people are going to suffer. So that's just a little snippet of kind of the conversations we have every day.
Yeah, I love that. So one thing I wanted to drift into, and I don't know if I think that could be its own talk, but I would at least wanted to touch on it. And I know that, in terms of mentorship, I know that you're big on mentorship, and for me, I'm doing a lot of research on it right now. And we're looking at one way to incorporate that into the new organization. But are there any tactical things that you can give to the listener? Like, if let's say that they are from an organization that's either struggling with the program or doesn't have a program, are there certain things that are like low-hanging fruit, or things that they can do to start or to focus on that as they get ramped up, or look to at least begin somewhere in mentorship?
Yeah. And it, like everything else, it's got to start with a commitment, right? So we have to, as a leadership team, make the commitment to investing in the next generation a priority. Okay. Through training, through coaching, through mentoring, through the other tools that are out there. So it's got to start with a commitment. Then we've got to define what we want. That one of the reasons why mentoring programs fail is that we don't give them the tools, the mentoring tools that they need. So if I'm going to start a mentoring program, these are going to be people who are going to enter into one-on-one relationships with our current members and our future leaders. That's a great opportunity to start selling the chosen culture, but we got to give them the tools to do that. We can't just say, hey, we need you to mentor Johnny, and then they go out and they do it based on their past experiences. Now, that's part of it, but we're trying to move the organization in a direction. So to answer your question, yeah, it's got to start with a commitment, and then we got to define what that commitment is. You get to that point, and then it becomes pretty easy, because you've decided where we want to go. We've given them the tools that map out the course to get there. And then we make sure we put the best people in those mentoring positions. Too many people make mentoring a deal where it's your turn or whatever. Mentoring is huge responsibility. So we want to make sure we have the right people functioning as mentors. We want to commit to it and say, hey, we're going to put some money behind this. It's not just going to be lip service. So very recently, we have part of our mentoring process is a shadowing period. So when somebody steps up from captain to battalion chief, they have 5 tours, which is 10 shifts. We're on the 4896. And very recently, we were doing these new officers, and one of the battalion chiefs came to me and said, man, when somebody goes home, we're taking them off the car, and this thing is not fluid like it should be. And so I went to my boss and I said, listen, we're going to start paying overtime. This is why. This is the benefits. This is what it's going to produce. So now we're keeping them together. So we're showing that we are committed to it, that we're putting financial resources behind it. We're putting the time element behind it. We're not going to pull you off and give you, one of the things I will warn you about, Chief, and do what you want with this. Two very lofty goals in your vision. You want to be the organization that everybody loves to come to work, and you want to be loved by the community. Those two things are going to compete with one another. Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And one of those is going to become the priority at some point, and that is going to put a ding in your culture. For example, you're going to say, hey, training is important. So Truck One puts together this awesome training program. They've worked on it. The day has come that they're going to deliver the training. And the nursing home down the street calls and says, we want you to come out and do blood pressures for 4 hours. Which one gets the priority? A serious question. Which one gets the priority? That's going to define your culture. You go out to the nursing home, what's that truck captain going to say? Well, I guess training isn't the most important thing. We're going to go do blood pressures for 4 hours. I put this work into it, and now they're pulling me off. Mm-hmm. If you tell the nursing home, hey, we can't come right now because we got this drill planned, now those are saying, well, I guess the public education aspect. So that is going to be something that you are going to have to balance. Mm-hmm. And I've heard it throughout the course of our 17 journey where the guys say, we don't have enough time to do all the things you want us to do. And that causes a frustration. Downtime is important. Recovery time is important. Relaxation time is important. So, I'm just using that as an example. We all want those in organizations, but they compete with one another. Don't downplay that. And as a leadership team, you're going to have some formula, some mindset, a Ouija board to figure out which one of those is truly going to be 1A and 1B, and what's the ripple effect for making that decision. And we'll talk about that 5 years down the road and tell me if I'm right or not.
Yeah, we'll set a calendar reminder for 5 years to do this again, right?
I mean, right now you have a blank canvas. You're in a very fortunate area. You got a blank canvas, and you can make that look. And you need to shoot for the stars and maximize every opportunity. But that canvas starts to fill up, and pretty soon there's no more white left. And now you want to add this color, and you're not sure where do we put it. Do we cover this up? Do we cover that up? So I would just say to keep that in your back of your mind when you're talking about pursuing a chosen culture.
Yeah, no, and it's definitely not lost on us that those challenges are coming. And we talk about that every day. And I often say to our team, how we respond to things is going to define us. So whatever those challenges are, how would men and women respond to these situations? Not like maybe you've done in your past where you go silo and go start, bad mouthing somebody. How do professionals tackle these challenges? That's where we start. As we're drifting into the end of the conversation, I do want to ask a couple things. You get the chance to go across the country, more so than most, and you speak to a lot of different fire departments. In general, what kind of trends are you seeing out there? Like, especially with the newer firefighters, what trends are you seeing out there that we need to address? And I guess the question that comes with that is, of the trends you're seeing, how do those, let's say, new firefighters need to address them, but how do we, as the fire service, help them succeed? What does that look like?
Well, and you also, when you sent me the kind of the outline or topics we're going to talk about, you talked about one of the things that keeps me up at night. So I'm going to answer that question, both of those questions in this response. Leadership training is lacking throughout the fire service, right? So preparing our mid-level supervisors, our company officers, our shift commanders, we need to do a much better job of that. Certainly in the Colony Fire Department, that's one of our weaknesses. But what I'm seeing is this divide. The people we're bringing into our organizations, they want to learn. They want to go to conferences. They want to listen to podcasts. They want to read articles. They want to do those things. And then we have our guys that have been here for a while who are in more influential positions, some of our bosses and so forth. Now, you're a new organization. They don't want to listen to podcasts. They don't want to do that stuff. So while they may have the most experience in the organization, they don't have the most up-to-date knowledge. They're not reading the Firefighter Rescue Survey or Project Mayday or the stuff in the firefighter research stuff that's going on that UL is doing. And so you start to see this divide, and that hurts that micro culture. We've got this young generation, which in a lot of cases is the majority of our organization, and they're seeing all this cool stuff go on around the fire service, and they want to be a part of that. I mean, I get calls all the time, and they're like, how can we get our, and again, we got problems in the colony like everybody else has, but they'll say, well, how can we get a culture like yours? Well, I can't answer that. I mean, there's a whole ton of things that play into it. But as I see as I go around the country, they're starting to think about this vision of success, where they want to go, but they're very frustrated on the path to get there. They don't know how to get there. And so I would say that's part of it. And then giving our officers the tools that reinforce what we're wanting to do. And that takes a lot of work on the front end. That answers all the questions that we've been talking about. So when a company officer walks in the firehouse, we still want them to practice the art of leadership. We still want them to have their unique leadership traits, but they got to lead with it. A fire department is a complex system made up of subsystems, processes, policies that determine our practices. Okay. So we've got to give our officers the tools. We got to put the bumpers up, if you will, or define the box for which we want them to operate in. If we don't give them those tools, we're going to be very fragmented. Mm-hmm. And we're going to be pursuing a bunch of different things at once. And that doesn't work real well in a paramilitary organization that, goals should be to deliver a consistent level of service across all shifts, all districts. In other words, my survivability needs to be dependent on the situation, not the operational philosophy of the crew that is showing up to respond to my call. This captain's aggressive. This captain's not aggressive. This captain believes in aggressive search. This one doesn't. If you have that in your organization, you have a problem because your chances of survival now is going to depend on who's on duty and whose district you live in. So how do you get that consistency day in, day out in the service that you deliver? Did I answer the question? I feel like I may have went all around it.
No, you know what, you answered in a way where I think it's not catastrophic or disheartening. It's a good answer, because you mentioned you're seeing a lot of people, like the newer folk, that are wanting to go to conferences, wanting to learn, wanting this information we have, that they crave it, right? And I think that statement alone aligns with a lot of the cultural research was out there, which is like some of the younger folk and the younger generations, they want one-on-one, they want face-to-face, they want people to take them under their wings, they want to be shown things, right? And that's a good place to start. It's a really good place to start. And I think that is echoed with, like, I was talking to Basil recently about a class he runs here in Florida. And he says he's got close to 400 people applying for all these courses he does, and he takes 40 per class. So there's this groundswell on a lot of these things. And we see this with across the board. I see this in the EMS side. I see this in South Florida in our EMS community. I see this with the RIT competitions. I see this with extrication competition teams, ALS competition teams. There's a good groundswell too. So it's heartening that you're at least seeing that, but mentioning the challenges. Okay, they're ate up with it. They go to a conference, they come back to the station, and what is the culture there? Who is the person that's going to maybe knock them down a notch because they're ingrained, not motivated, whatever, right? So, but I like that you started with that, because it gives us hope. It gives us the knowledge that, yes, there's hungry people out there, and they're waiting for guys like us and people to encourage them. So no, I think you did answer it. I like that, because it's a problem that you're seeing, that I'm aware of it. We're all aware of it. So, in terms of making sure we address that gap, that's the important thing. So yeah, I love it. The last question I have for you, Chief, this is more of like just continuation, homework, those kind of things, in terms of like leaders or readers, right? So in terms of knowledgeable books or knowledgeable texts or documents, if you were to recommend a few things to people out there, what does your mind go to?
So, you go through phases, right, of your learning seasons. Right now, I'm really focused. I mean, I spent a lot of years studying culture and doing all those things, and that's still important. But right now, I'm really uh, diving into mindset, and we've mentioned it a couple of times. For example, right now, I got my guys trying to get JB Mooney. He's the world biggest earner bull rider. Okay, now that's a mindset, and we're packaging it in. What is your 8 seconds? Bull riders, if you know anything about the sport, they could have a broken collarbone, 3 broken ribs, and they're going to drive 5 hours to get to Cheyenne to ride in a rodeo. They're going to get on a bull for 8 seconds. They're going to take their money and they're going to go. That's a mindset. Rock climbers, that take on these things. So you look at what the mind is possible of. I'm a big believer in the Thunderbirds and the Blue Angels and how they're able to do what they do and what some of our special ops people are capable of doing. I listen to the Sean Ryan podcast a lot. So The Art of Clear Thinking is a book that I've recently read. Atomic Habits is another good one. This is an older one, but Deep Survival, Who Lives, Who Dies, and Why. And I think right now, we got a lot of operators. I don't know, the last time at FDIC, there's 9,000 engine company classes being offered, and 5,000 truck company classes. We're figuring out the way to force the doors better and to stretch a line better and to do all those. We got a ton of people on that. But mindset right now is where I think we can make the biggest improvements in the American Fire Service is to really, and what we're doing, unfortunately, we're using the modern fire environment. We're using the data on cancer and mental health to really lessen our commitment. We're giving off ramps to our people to be prepared to prepare to go out to do an extremely dangerous job. And that really concerns me. We're not focusing on the performance side of things. We're all around it with all the other stuff. But this is a performance-based thing that we do. And how well we perform could quite possibly determine who lives and who dies. And we're putting that way down on the list. We're making things way more important than that. And that doesn't work in a service like this. And we're seeing this grassroots effort with things like Basil doing and some of the other guys, Rob's doing with his Mayday. We're seeing this grassroots effort to take back this mission and make this more about performance, how we perform on the playing field. And at the end of the day, that's how we're going to be judged. And we better get that back up to the top of the list or we're going to have some problems. So just a couple books, The Art of Clear Thinking, Atomic Habits, Deep Survival by Lawrence Gonzalez. And then we talked about a common mindset. I'm sure you're aware of the book of Search. But one thing on that was really impressive, when Corley asked me to do that project, he just said, I need 3,000 words on Search from the chief's perspective. Okay, that was it. I knew nothing really about the project. When that book came out, almost without exception, there was a consistent mindset through that book on how search should be prioritized and how it should be performed. Man, we need more books like that. Not that we don't want competing theories and thoughts, but what they did is they brought together a group of operators, people who are doing it. They're not just talking about it, they're doing it. And they're sharing their successes. And what we found out is that there is a better way. These things consistently work. Man, that's big time in what we do, because we don't have a lot of that. We can argue all day about nozzles, the use of fans. Should we run code to an alarm in bed? All this stuff that we're doing, we have not discovered the best way yet. So we need to be pursuing that. It's what's the expression? If you strive for perfection, you'll achieve excellence. I think those are this is a performance-based thing that we do. And with social media, we're getting called out, we're getting evaluated. And I'm telling you, if we don't figure this thing out, we're going to have some challenges as we get more and more expensive. as funding gets cut in communities and we want more and more money. We just took delivery of a $1.7 million tiller truck. Well, if the city gives us that kind of money, we ought to increase our capability significantly, or that's not a good investment. If we're the same organization after we get that as we were before, that's a bad investment.
I like that. That speaks right there. That's gospel. All right, man. Well, you know what? We're coming close to a little more than an hour here. I just wanted to reflect on some of these things that I wrote down.
Yeah.
I took more pages of notes than I've taken in a while, so you have to give me a second just to kind of comb through some of these things. We started off with talking about the culture and diving into that in terms of at the micro level versus the macro level, redundant versus reinforcing. We talked about the functional fire company and the importance of that. We talked about everything that some of the things you guys are doing there, and some that speaks to people, whether it's the single role medics, whether it's the engine and the truck culture that you developed, and how being basically intentional about making sure you define your culture so people are aligned with that is important. We talked about a variety of things that we found in your books, like the 6 things you expect of them, attention to the mission, taking care of people, and then all those steps. We talked about recruitment and retention and what that looks like. We talked about, a variety of, how you're selling your department to people. How are you explaining that to people? And we also talked about, and I'm circling these things right now, like just being intentional for the fact like you're hiring people that know your culture, that don't mind training. Like if they mind it, well, you know what? Maybe you shouldn't apply. It's not that you're a bad person. It's just that you can work here. I love some of the statements that you made. In fact, I think one of the most powerful ones is, the idea of letting a firefighter being a firefighter is great, but that's just a bumper sticker unless you define it. And I think that concept alone speaks to a variety of different things that maybe are said, but what does that look like in the real world?
Chief, let me interrupt you just for a minute though, but a majority of our firefighters are getting their daily training from the phone, right? Mm-hmm. And they'll see this saying or this little piece and they gravitate to that, but nobody has taken the time to explain what that looks like. It's like if we have core values, we got to have action steps for those core values. So bumper stickers are dominating. It's all about stickers and catchphrases. We have one on the back of our rigs that says, "We will come for you." Well, that has a whole lot more meaning than just those words. We got to dive in and say, okay, now we got to figure out how to live this. And again, I think that's where a lot of organizations confront frustration is they hear these cool little words or these cool little phrases and they want to institutionalize it, but there's no action steps to that. We don't do the deep dive and say, okay, well, this is what letting firefighters be. And when we started saying that, we have people that weaponize that. Now they think it's about, well, I want to look like this, so I'm not going to wear my uniform because, and so that's the ripple effect. There's a ripple effect to everything. But go ahead. I didn't mean to interrupt you, but I'm just saying, we got to take the time, especially if we're going to put mentors out there. Every fire service professional, if somebody asks them, what does success in the fire service look like? They should be able to answer that with something other than a bumper sticker. The fire went out and everybody went home. That's what they're going to say, right? But now we start saying, okay, well, how do you achieve that? And they get this blank look. And so we got to get away from these little catchphrases that we can't have more than a 30-second discussion on it. Sorry, go ahead.
No, I'm actually writing something down and you just prompted something. No, I love that you went there. And it's powerful, right? If the concept is powerful. And you're right. The idea of weaponization, that right there can be its whole nother topic of let's say misinterpretation or miscommunication or whatever you want to say. But yes, I think we've seen that. A lot of people have seen that. I think two of the powerful things that you mentioned here, and they go with one hand in hand, were when internal and external voices need to be matching, and when the microculture and the macro culture align. Having the people in the field reflecting what the top say and vice versa. I think that's powerful. I also like the statement more alike than different. In other words, you made it intentional to your battalion chiefs. We need to be more alike than different. I think that as we end this conversation, that's one thing that's going to go through my mind as I have continual conversations with my operational team and my battalion chiefs. That's a powerful statement. I like that. Um, and a lot of this was more tactical in nature, and I love it. In terms of the books, in terms of things you do to start mentorship programs or mentoring at the stations, and then the trends you see in that divide. But again, with that divide, we're also seeing still the people that are out there, the generation that's on today. We do see people that are motivated, they're interested, and they're hungry for the job. How do we feed them? How do we give them what they need to survive? Anyway, Chief. So listen, I've got a lot of work to do going through these notes alone. So as what happens in a lot of these conversations, sometimes I get more homework than I have coming in. So I guess I appreciate that. So thank you.
Sure, certainly. Certainly.
But as we close here, any final thought that goes through, we talked about a lot and everything, but as we talk about and finish up on culture, any final thought?
I guess just to you guys, and we'll certainly talk about this when we come together. You're in a great position. We talked about kind of the blank canvas. So I would just say, and this would apply to a new boss going into a new firehouse, a young firefighter going into a new organization. Try to visualize success to the best that you can so that you're always having something to pursue. That's where growth occurs. As a leader, as a follower, if there's something out there that you're working towards every day, we're going to prevent that drift towards failure. We're going to minimize the chance of complacency. And the more we do that, again, I'm going to use the word, the more that becomes institutionalized. Way back, I think it was before COVID, Dallas Fire Department, they were like going to hire 300 people in a year. And I was talking to one of the chiefs and I said, now is the time to change your culture. You start introducing these 300 new members to this chosen culture. And as they become more influential in the organization, they will start to become advocates for that culture. And that's what you want. They become senior men and women. They become company officers. They become shift commanders. Then they become the ops chief and maybe the fire chief. But if we miss those opportunities early on in their introduction to our organization, that's why a solid indoctrination period or probationary period is so important. If we don't start them off with the right mindset, we're going to cause ourselves challenges down the road. And so we really got to put that effort in on the front end so that we get the fruits on the back end. What is it? You got to plant the tree early to get the shade. It's going to be a lot of years before you get the shade of the tree. Mm-hmm. And so if we miss those opportunities and then we go back and try to correct those once mindsets and all those are already formed, it just makes things a whole lot more difficult.
Well, Chief, thank you for all the time you spent. I know this is it's early morning on a weekend. And I appreciate you dedicating your time to this, man. But I think that we did justice to the reason I started this in the first place, man, was to just develop tactical ways to deploy these things, and I think we did justice to that, and I thank you for that.
Absolutely.
So as we close up, just a heartfelt thank you to Chief Thompson for spending your time with me. For the listener out there, we designed this for the listener to listen, to learn, to apply at home, wherever you're at in your organizations. For me, I do appreciate the people reaching out, and whether it's a phone call or a text, and every so often saying that they clicked or it meant something. So I definitely appreciate it. Keep those coming. Definitely appreciate it. These episodes drop in the second Friday of every month. Once again, I just thank everybody for listening to the Perspectives on Leadership podcast. Thank you for tuning in. Everybody's got their choice of podcasts to listen to. So the fact that you're choosing to listen to this one means the world. So hopefully we'll see you all soon. I think we'll both be at FDIC in April. So if you're there, come say hi. But Chief, once again, thank you for your time. Much appreciated.
Thank you. Glad to be on. Thanks for having me.
All right. So everybody have a wonderful, wonderful and safe weekend. And we'll see you